Good morning. Beautiful opportunity for us to get into the good word together right now. 1 Peter chapter 2 is where we will find the beginning of the lesson. 1 Peter chapter 2. And if you have not yet, either raise your hand or go get you one of the lesson sheets that's on the back there. Looks like everyone's got it. 1 Peter chapter 2. First Peter chapter 2. Peter writes one of his general epistles, not written to any specific group, but addressed, open, and more inclusive than Paul's writings. And he is writing namely for the purpose of encouraging the first century Christians while they are struggling, some with persecution, and I'm sure there are many other trials and tribulations that came their way, but we find these things useful and applicable for us when we are moving through 21st century as well. So I want you to read with me 1 Peter chapter 2, and we're going to read verses 21 through 23 to get us going. So let's read. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, it says, "For even hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should walk in his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who when he was reviled not again, when he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously." Okay. Now, to get a broader grasp of the reason or the purpose for which Peter writes this, I want you to move it back one verse and read that with me, because we just got the picture and the idea of the fact that Jesus left us an example, and the expectation is that we would see what Jesus did, see from the writings, the way he engaged himself with humanity, the way he lived his life, and follow in his steps that he left behind, which is one of the most beautiful things that you can possibly imagine, because it's not just law. He never just said, do what I say. He also lived that life, which is much more effective. Same thing with management or parenthood. Yeah, I'm sure you've all heard people say, or parents say, do as I say, not as I do. That's like the worst way to teach somebody. And so Jesus didn't just say that, do as I say and not as I do. He said, do as I say and as I do. He taught and he also practiced. And that's what we just read. But let's get a little bit more of a broad perspective on why it is written. It says in verse 20, "For what glory is it if, when you are buffeted for your faults, you shall take it patiently? For if, when you do well and suffer for it, and you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God." Now, there's like a piece of logic that Peter is using here. Now, if you get corrected for something that you did, that's the way it is, the way it ought to be. There should be consequences for everything that we do. That isn't always the way that it works, but when that happens, what's great about that is, Peter's question. And then he says, but if you are doing the right thing, if you are living the right life, if you are living the life of a Christian and you are suffering for it, this is something that God notices. This is acceptable with God. And then he goes right into the fact that that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus lived his life And you can see the general way in which he lived his life from the writings of the Gospels, and of course, especially in his ministry. But what I want you to notice with me now is what Peter focuses in on is the time of suffering. The difficult time. There's a tension that takes place. Now, there's a saying that you'll hear from time to time, no good deed goes unpunished. I've probably heard that before. Now, when somebody makes up the mind to become a Christian or to truly live as a disciple, because so much of the time we kind of just go with the flow, go with the current of life, and just move with life. And that's written about in the scriptures. We don't want to live, tossed to and fro like the wave of the sea. That's not the way we want to live our life. We want to be solid. We want to be different than everybody else. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's one of the reasons why you'll hear me say it from time to time that the Apostle Paul gets the worst salesman award, because he talks about how horrible and how rough life is. And he says, be more like me. And it's like, you just convinced me not to live like you. But somewhere along the way, when you mature in your faith, and just by getting to know Jesus, you read about Jesus, and what Peter does is he focuses in on the suffering of the Christ, and that's how he teaches us here. He suffered for doing the right thing. And don't expect that that's not going to be your life if you are living the proper life. It's going to be a hard life. We are but strangers and pilgrims in a wayfaring land. Life is not about the billboards and the island life. That's not what we are supposed to be seeking down here. Is it okay to do that? Of course it is, but that is not our calling. We're not trying to make it big. We're not trying to make it rich. We're trying to make it holy in this life. And that's what Jesus did. So just to enhance that emphasis right now, verse 21 says, for hereunto were ye called. So you were called to this. You see what I'm saying? You were called to this. Because Christ also suffered. But he didn't just suffer. He suffered for us. And that is his example. And our duty is then to follow that example. So yes, Jesus leads us into suffering. And as a result of suffering, verse 22, he behaved himself with no sin. So no matter how hard it got, there's never an opportunity for him to say, yeah, but you don't know how rough it was. That's why I behaved the way I behaved. That's why I lashed out the way I lashed out. That's why I gave in to the flesh, because it was getting hard for me. He never did that. He never used that as his excuse. It says in verse 23, when he was reviled, he reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously. So that is actually a quoting of one of the Psalms. David makes that statement, and Jesus quoted that when he was on the cross. And we're actually going to take a look at some of the statements that Jesus made while he was on the cross, because that is the ultimate example of him suffering, is on the cross. But when Jesus was hanging on the cross before he died, he actually spoke the words, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. He gave his everything, his spirit and his whole commitment. And that is going to be one of the things that we're going to be talking about, is commitment, like what commitment even looks like, because that is what we are called to, a commitment to righteousness despite whatever may come our way. So I'm going to show you a couple of verses that show Jesus hanging on the cross. We're going to start with Matthew 27. So let's take a look at Matthew 27 together. Matthew chapter 27. Whenever I read this stuff, I can't help but be moved by it. If you ever say in a commitment to reading, sometimes you'll make up your mind. I think most of our reading, we kind of hop around but sometimes you want to read like a whole book. And I don't know if you've ever done this. I've been reading somewhere, and when I get to chapter 27, it's tempting to skip it because it's hard to read. It's hard to read. I don't know if I ever have skipped it, but it's tempting to because it's a bit much if you're reading it with the full intent and experience. In Matthew 27, there's a statement here, and we'll read it together. Verse 46, it says, "And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why have you forsaken me?" For Jesus, the Son of God, God in the flesh, the Word that was with God in the beginning and was God in the beginning, to actually be moved and brought to a point to where he would actually quote these words from the 22nd Psalm. We're going to be going to the 22nd Psalm just a little bit, but for him to actually reach a point to where he speaks the words or even thinks the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" means that he must have been going through immense pressure that is beyond our imagination. But that is quoted from the 22nd Psalm, which we will be going over there in just a moment. Don't do it just yet. But that is in the 22nd Psalm, but I also now want you to please go with me to the book of Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews chapter 2. And we're going to read 2 verses out of there. The first couple of chapters of Hebrews, the author does a phenomenal job of bringing forth our knowledge of the Christ. Now, this was designed for these first century people and is still just as real and applicable and meaningful to us today as we read it. However, one of the things that he was doing is he was using Old Testament literature, Old Testament prophecy to make it extremely clear that all these prophecies were talking about a special person, not just any old angel, not just any old prophet, not just any old good person. He was talking about something very special, and that's what these first 2 chapters of Hebrews are about. And one of the things about this person, of course, we know this person as Jesus the Christ. One of the things that's so special about him is displayed in these 2 verses that we are going to read. And these are also from the 22nd Psalm. So you're going to see how this all connects and what we're going to do here. But the 22nd Psalm is also quoted here. And the Hebrew author quotes it as if Jesus himself spoke these words. Okay? So, Hebrews 2, verses 11 and 12, it says, "For both he that sanctifies and they who are sanctified are all of one." So, he that sanctifies, Jesus, and they who are sanctified, Christians, disciples of Christ, they are all one. Finishing the verse, "For which cause he is not ashamed to call them brethren." So I find that to be a neat application or a neat use of this verse. Quoting the 22nd Psalm, the Hebrew epistle author uses this to show that Jesus views us as his brethren. Jesus did the same thing in his ministry. When there was the one story when Jesus was healing people and he was in a house and crowds are gathering around him, and his family, his mother and his brothers, wanted to get to him. And someone says from the audience, "Hey, Jesus, your family wants to get to you." And then his response to that was, "Who is my mother and my brothers and my sisters?" And then he uses like a hand gesture to point to the audience and say, "Those that do the will of my Father which is in heaven, they are my family." And of course, the same thing carries forth even now to this day. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to adopt that kind of mentality. Jesus was willing to not dismiss his family, but to say, my real family, this is my real family. For me and you and us to all have this kind of attitude, is what it would do is it would make the bond or the tie that binds all the more rich, all the more beneficial, and all the more useful for us to be able to actually fulfill what Jesus said. Remember now, love one another as I have loved you. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. That was his new commandment that he gave in the book of John, chapter 13. For us to be able to fulfill that, we have to be able to adopt the same mentality. Well, who is my family? And to be able to look across this building with these people and say, this is my family. These are my people. So, verse 12, he continues, and this is the actual quote of Psalm 22, saying, I will declare your name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thee. Isn't that cool? That is the actual quote from Psalm 22. And I started the 11th verse to show you how he prepares for the quote, how he applies it. He that sanctifies and they that are sanctified are one, and he is not ashamed to call them brethren. And then the way the Hebrew author draws that out and brings that application is the same way we want to start drawing the scriptures into our lives and then making them real and living them as they are displayed here. And what's cool, what I think is neat about this is Jesus being quoted actually by a psalm of David from Psalm 22. I will declare your name unto my brethren. In the midst of the church will I sing praise unto thee. He's talking about a congregation. He's talking about an assembly. He's talking about a lifestyle that takes place in a worship setting where there will be a public declaration declaring the name of God in heaven, of course. And that's where he gets that information about Jesus not being ashamed to call us brethren. So let's take a look at this Psalm 22. Let's take a look at this notorious psalm. Let's go over there. Psalm 22. I'll tell you one of the ways that I remember this psalm is it's the psalm right before Psalm 23. That's how I originally remembered it. Because Psalm 23 is one of the most quoted places in all the Bible. Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures and all that. So if you take a look at the psalm right before Psalm 23, you will find Psalm 22. And I'm going to tell you right now, similar to reading like Matthew 27, or the actual record of Jesus being crucified, the 22nd Psalm has a similar impact upon me. What I want to do with you is read the first 21 verses to give you the broad perspective. And I'm going to also give this information to you. Isaiah chapter 53, you don't have to go over there right now, but Isaiah chapter 53, that's where we go much of the time to understand a little bit of the suffering of the Christ. He's a man of sorrows. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter. By his stripes, we are healed. One of the most commonly quoted places of Scripture to establish the prophecy of Jesus and what he was going to have to go through in his suffering. Now, if you take that and then you compare it to Psalm 22, it's interesting because what you will notice is Isaiah chapter 53 is actually more of a vision of the cross from the audience's perspective, from humanity's perspective. It's like humanity looking at Jesus on the cross and describing what is happening. But if you notice the 22nd Psalm and David's incredible, rich connection that he had with the Christ, you will notice that this is written as if from the actual mind of Jesus while he was hanging on the cross. Like David, by the power of the divine Spirit, there's no way he could have done this except it had been by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, because he writes as if the perspective of the Christ while he was hanging on the cross. And when you think about the fact that he would do that for us, it is mind-blowing. So this is Jesus' way of getting us to go back and look at this, him quoting it, my God, why have you forsaken me? But he says it in its original language. Let's go ahead and read it now. Psalm 22, beginning at verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you hear not. And in the night season, I am not silent. But you are holy, O you that inhabit the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and you did deliver them. They cried unto thee and were delivered. They trusted in thee and were not confounded. But I am a worm. So you'll see a shift there. Part of the style of the writing here, the poetry that is displayed here. We have the deep, burning sensation of pain and agony that Jesus is enduring on the cross. And David must have been going through something pretty intense too when he was going through this, when he was writing this. But he turns the attention toward the Father immediately in verse 3 differently. At first, it's God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? Verse 3, he immediately changes and shifts it. It's almost as if to say, despite my pain and despite my agony, I have to remind myself that God is holy. Now, is that not something that you would go through when you go through pain and agony? Because when all you can see is your pain, when all you can see is shame, when all you can see is the bad stuff, it's hard to see God for who he really is. And then what you have to do is you have to say no. And you have to stop yourself and remind yourself, God is holy. That's why Romans 8:28 is so powerful for me, one of my favorite verses. Because it says, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. That's one of the reasons why that's one of my favorites, because it reminds me that no matter what is happening, no matter how I feel, God is going to bring it to be good somehow. Even though I don't understand. And we see that happening in this psalm. God, why have you forsaken me? Why did you leave me? And then immediately in verse 3, he shifts and changes. But no, you are holy. You are there for the fathers. I know that. And he leans into the stories. Like Egypt and God hearing the prayer of the fathers. But then, verse 6, he goes right back to what Jesus is experiencing on the cross. Verse 6. And he's going to keep doing this for a while. But I am a worm, and no man, a reproach of men, and despised by the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, He trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. But you are he that took me out of the womb. You did make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. You are my God from my mother's belly. You see the shift, how he's reminding himself. He's reminding himself again that God is God. Verse 11, Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me around. They gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and a roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like pottery, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. And you have brought me into the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare upon me. They've part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture. But be not far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, for you have heard me from the horns of the wild oxen. Okay. I usually don't read all that in a sermon. I usually hit the highlights. But I started the lesson by bringing to your minds the fact that Jesus left an example, and what Peter does in 1 Peter 2 that we read is he emphasizes the suffering of the Christ. When he reviled not again. When he suffered, he did not threaten. That was his example. That's what he did. And you just experienced it with him to some degree when we read that together. What Jesus actually experienced and how he actually felt while he was hanging on the cross. And even though that was what he was experiencing, which of course, all those thoughts, all this running through the mind of somebody who is in deep pain and agony, not just physical, but spiritual, being spiritually attacked and surrounded by wickedness. This is the very next thing that is said. Verse 22. I will declare your name unto my brethren. In the midst of the congregation will I praise thee. The suffering didn't matter. It's pretty much the point. His mind was on his people. Nothing else mattered. Verse 23. You that fear the Lord, praise him. All ye seed of Jacob, glorify him. And fear him, all ye the seed of Israel. Not only is he declaring the name, he wants you to declare him. If you are someone that fears the Lord, praise him. Glorify him. Verse 24. For he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. He sees their pain, and he doesn't despise it. Neither has he hid his face from him. But when he cried unto him, he heard. My praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. And that's where I get the lesson, the name of it. Kind of a combination of those two. Verse 22, in the midst of the congregation. And right here he says, my praise shall be of thee. My praise shall be of God. He's going to have his mind on God and on his people. He's going to be declaring the name of God before his people. He's thinking about his people, and he's glorifying God simultaneously. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. And Jesus definitely paid his vows. And so the application now brings you to a deeper, richer understanding of the fact that in these moments, and really truly in life in general, nothing matters but us declaring in the midst of the congregation. And of course, in the midst of humanity declaring his name, that is what evangelism is, being able to talk to people about how great Jesus is. But I want you to keep this in your mind all the more richly and surely that when we are here together, we are thinking one about another, declaring the name of God to each other, and there should be something vibrating within you and outside of you as a result of that. There should be something that changes the way we all feel when we leave this room together, as if Jesus, who was able to do that, even though he went through that kind of suffering, I know none of you suffering like that. I know none of you feel like a worm quite like that. I know none of you feel like you're surrounded by lions and bulls like this. Maybe you have that feeling in different ways, in different capacities in your life, but let that go off to the side and declare the name of God one to another in the midst of the congregation, and let it be your number one priority, because that is what Jesus did. So should you. And if you have not been baptized for the remission of your sins, been washed in the blood, let that be another example of the fact that you are going to declare his name in obedience to him in baptism. You are declaring his death and you're declaring his resurrection when you do that. So come forth while we stand and sing. And sing for real now.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in his grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood? In the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Your garments spotless, are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood? In the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb. Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Well, our brother Jerry isn't with us, so that's why I'm standing here. And he's visiting another congregation, And I don't know what to say about that, other than he's a very friendly person and he has friends. And we miss Jerry because he's got a smile that is just not like a lot of people. He's great. Ellen and Jeff are not with us this morning because their son David got out of the hospital, I believe, Thursday, and he's going to need help for about 2 weeks. So it was either he stayed at their house or they stayed at his house, and his house is much easier to maneuver in. They have a vicious set, Ellen and Jeff have a vicious set of stairs that, that's how they get to their bathroom, and so they're gonna live out there in Antioch with Dave for about 2 weeks. Let's remember Susan's daughter and her niece and Shivani, and I know there are a lot of others that are battling cancer and have problems that I don't have written down here. But let's remember them in our prayers. We have a potluck next week, and I have to say, Lori has created this schedule of events for the church, and this is the most comprehensive schedule I have ever seen. I told her I don't live my life with that much structure, so this is foreign to me. I get up every morning and so this is awesome. Anyway, next week we have a potluck, and I believe it says barbecue because when Dave mentioned it weeks ago, he was in a meat mood, and so we will have barbecue and barbecue-like things. And next week, after the potluck, at 4:30, we will get together and have a men's meeting and a women's class meeting that the women get together without the men and the men get together without the women. And we'll see how that all works out. It'll probably work out great. I know Laura was passing out material for the women's class, and if you haven't gotten it, I don't know if it's back there. See Laura. And I believe that's all the announcements. Can we ask Daryl, would you lead us in a closing prayer?
Thank you for the time you shared today. Singing praise to you, worship to you, understanding and learning more about the word. We ask that you guide us and protect us throughout this week. Help us to walk in the way that we continue to show love. Please forgive us for our
too.
My favorite
God